All right, Marte, let's go over how to set up that Weakaura. So you want a Weakaura that shows an ability when it's up and hides it when it's on, when it's off cooldown. So I'm going to use Swiftman because it's got a 13-second cooldown. So we're going to go to new. These are the different types over here you can pick from. So you want an icon to show, right? You could also do a progress bar or a texture or whatever, but by default I tend to do icons. So I'm gonna put a name down here. So I'm gonna put it Marte NS. Hit enter, and that's gonna save the name. I've got a bunch of stuff in here. Might look a little complicated, but whatever. So now you can see there's a question mark here. If I want to set a specific icon, I can come in here and type in, like, let's say I wanted to do nature swiftness. So I could pick, the icon itself for nature swiftness, or I guess technically Swiftmend. If I wanted to do Swiftmend, or you could do it just as anything really that you want to do. So I wonder if I could do can I do Blue Dragon? I could do just because I thought of it. You could do Blue Dragon. That's what's called a fallback icon, and then you can tell it where to pull the icon from. So if you pick dynamic, it's going to prioritize the trigger, so the spell that you're triggering, versus the fallback. But if you select fallback and then you set fallback to be like I said, Blue Dragon or Circle of Healing, Circle of Healing, or whatever the icon you want it to be, you can put that there. I just leave it as dynamic normally, and it just pulls it. It's just less work for me to do, but just so you know. Also, by default, you might see here, I've got a border and some text in there. By default, a lot of these, so this first section is the icon settings. You can drop that down to hide it. Position settings basically tells where it's in the map, how big the box is, the dimensions, try to make it square, right? You can also drag the corner here and resize it if you want to do it by hand, or if you want to do exact numbers, you can type in like 50 pixels by 50 pixels, and then you can position it and you can inch it around up or down, whatever, with these little handles. If you want to anchor it to for example, to like a unit frame to like pop up on a heal thing here, like those little like highlight boxes that people will have that go around the edges, or an icon maybe to pop in the middle. Like if you use innervate, like for example here, I'm going to innervate this guy and see I put that icon right there. There you go. Now it just pulled that because I have it pulling dynamic information. I don't have anything else in there. That's why you saw that change there. But anyways, so that's the position settings. And you can change the anchors again by anchor 2. So by default, it's screen parent group, which is just saying that I can just change it wherever I want. It's just on the screen. If I want to do it to a select frame or a mouse cursor or a nameplate or a unit frame, I can make specifics there. And then I can change all kinds of other stuff around that. Just to note, strata is this thing right here is basically a term for how it sits with other things, like a stack up essentially. So if you imagine if this was this is a low strata. So when I move something over it, it's below this box, right? So if I have my bag and I pull it here, you see how it's behind some of that, but then it's above other things. It's because each one of those has a different strata, and this one is higher. So the further you go down here, the tooltip is always the highest, and then background is the lowest. So if something is ever covering it, you want to move it up in strata, or if it's ever covering something, you want to drop it down in strata. Anyways, I'm going to close that. So here you're going to have some text. So these are different commands. So by default, they put in %s for some reason. So that's pulling, and if you hover over, it'll tell you some details. So it's pulling stack information. So I don't care about that. So I'm just going to delete the text altogether, and you'll see it disappear there. Now you can put a glow, right, or a pixel glow, which I'm sure you've seen, and they can go in here and edit the pit particles or the frequency or the thickness of the particles. I can change a custom color to make it whatever I want. And then you can have, it'll always be on. Another place you can do this later on is under actions. You can do it in here as well by show external glow element, show type, yada, yada, yada. You can go in here and you can add one in here as well. Just make sure that you check this hide glows application if that is the case. Okay, so let's work on yours specifically, right? So Weakauras are composed of basically a set of triggers and a set of conditions, or just a set of triggers. Sometimes it can be that simple. So the first top line here is super important because sometimes when Weakauras break, especially if they have more than one trigger, this tends to be the reason why. So this tells you required for activation and then trigger 1, or custom function if you want to get really fancy and code it yourself. I'm not going to do that. So what do I want this trigger to do? I want this trigger, Remember, we're looking at Swiftmend, right? Which is a spell. So right now I have it on type aura player. So that's not right. I want to get spell information. So I'm going to go to spell, and then I'm going to look at cooldown, charges, count, right? So now there's a few things you can do here. I believe I could be wrong on this. Hold on. Let me just be double verify. I think if you open your spell book and you drag the spell over, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. Yeah, it'll just automatically fill it out for you. And you know it's right when you see that you have text in there and you've got the icon. And you can see that this icon automatically updated to the Swiftmend icon. That's because it's pulling that dynamic information from the trigger that I just set up. Now, if I did it wrong, right, and let's throw an A on there and I was to type that in, see how I lost the image here, I lost the image here, and it says invalid. I pull it back in. Now, another thing you can do is I can literally just type out, well, hold on, let me show you. I can literally type out Swiftmend, right? Because you might be looking at like an item proc and you can't drag an item proc on. Another thing you can do is, if I don't know what your interface is, but I use LUI, so I'm going to put a buff on myself. So this buff right here has a name, yada, 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 but there's several Mark of the Wild. So if I were to go back into Weakaura real quick and type in Mark of the Wild, all right, that's covering it. Oops, misspelled the last part. Now what you're going to see is that icon there, but that's going to activate for multiple ranks of a spell. If you want to identify a specific rank of a spell or a buff or yada yada, maybe there's multiple types of fear or horrifies or bubbles or heals or whatever, multiple ranks of a spell. If you want to track a specific rank only, for instance, as a healer, I might only want to see max rank rejuves or max rank regrowths. Then what I can do, for example, I'll use that example, and I hover over this. See how it says ID in the bottom left where the timer is? And then it says 774. So that's the buff specific for that rank of spell. So that's actually a low rank one because I was testing something earlier. So that's a rank 1 rejuve. This right here would be max rank rejuve. So that's got a different number. That's 26982. So if I come over here and put in 26982, bingo. Now it picked up rejuvenation, and it's only going to match for max rank rejuve, nothing else, right? So that's how you set the spell. Now, we don't care about rejuve because we're under charges and counts. Now, you might want to do this if, let's say, you wanted to make one that pops up on like a frame, like if for when that person has the buff. You could do kind of what we originally had, where aura, buff, names, Mark of the Wild, right? And see, if I hover over, you can see all those things in that list right there. Those are all the possible ranks. Now, if I specify 26990, 26990. Yeah, now it still has Mark of the Wild in there, but it's only going to pick up, but I've got name plural, right? So that's another way. So if I copy this, hit OK, clear that out, and instead of name plural, I choose exact spell ID, and I put that back in, I get Mark of the Wild, but I only get the exact rank. Same thing if I were to put in something else like renew or whatever, bubble, etc. And there's other things you can do in here like own only. So if you want to see bubbles or renews only you put out instead of carpeting your frames or nameplates with other buffs from other players, you can check that. If for whatever reason, NPCs are casting spells that are cluttering shit up for you, you can check cast only by player characters. And also you can double click these, meaning, so if it's unchecked, it doesn't apply. If it's checked, it applies in the positive sense, meaning this is only going to show if this is true. If I click it again, it's going to go red. That's going to be the opposite. It means it's only going to be triggered when this is not true effectively. So that's why it says not only. So only, not only. And the only reason I bring that up, even though it changes text there, in the load screen, for example, if I click in combat, not in combat, in encounter, not encounter, that's all that means. It's basically saying load when I'm in encounter, only load when I'm not in combat, and then completely unchecked to disable the filter. Now let me get back. Sorry, I'm rambling here, but just wanted to go over some functionality. So let's get over to Swiftmend. There's only one rank of the spell, so it's easy, right? So I want it to show when you can choose here. So show on cooldown, not on cooldown, or always. So you want it to be not on cooldown, right? So we're going to show it when it's not on cooldown, which means that I'm going to put on this. I have a buff. Now I can Swiftmend it off. There you go. So it shows when it's available. It hides when it's not available. Now in 9 seconds, it should pop right back up. Let's see. 3, 2, 1. regrowth. There you go. That's simple. Now, if you want to change some stuff on it to make it more visible or stand out or whatever, you can do that, right? So I can come in here, first thing under icon settings, I can adjust the zoom, right? I can adjust what the picture looks like. I can change the alpha, how see-through it is. I can change the icon inset, which doesn't really do much actually if you're not using matte. You can add the tooltip if you mouse over it. So if I mouse over, I can see the Swiftman tooltip. Probably don't want that. Let's see. You can also do a coloring on it. So if I wanted to like pixelate it green or red or purple or whatever, you could do that. And you can also come in here and like change the alpha on that or change the fade on that, whatever. I'm not going to do any of that. You can desaturate it completely. Now you can also do some other things here. So this is just the trigger. This is what's just basically flipping the switches on and off, right? So some other things you can do is I can go into animations, for example, and I could make it say, so there's start, main, and finish. And what this does is, this is the start of the Weakaura. This is when it's up and running, right? It's been triggered, not, so there's the initialization of the trigger is running, and the trigger ends, right? So perfect example is right, what you see right there is the running of the trigger. That's the main, right? It's already been activated and now it's just on until the end condition turns it off. So I put this on. Now I'm going to finish the Weakaura. I'm going to turn off the trigger. That disables the trigger, right? Because it's no longer true that it's off cooldown. Now I'm going to wait, and then it's going to activate, and then it's going to go into main. It looks all like one thing, but I'm going to show you what the differences are here in a second. You might not ever need to use this, but it just gives you more tools on what you can do. So it popped back up, right? So that the popping it up is activating the trigger, and then it running right now, like you see it right there, is the main. So for example, if I go in here to preset, you can do custom as well, but presets are nice. I can make it do things like bounce in or shrink or expand or slide in or spiral, whatever, right? So let's do something like pretty garish so you can see it. So we'll have it bounce in, and then once it's triggered, we're then going to say, I want it to flip. And then when it's done, I'm going to want it to fade out. So it bounces in, and then it's going to flip and flip and flip and flip until I use it. And then when I eventually use it, it's going to fade out. So that's just a bunch of stuff you don't have to ever use, ever. But sometimes it's nice to catch your attention with something when it comes up or down or whatever. Another thing before I get into a few other things, real important is load. So few tips here. If you're going to do something like, for example, because your Weakauras, if you have multiple characters on one account, are on your account instead of per character, it might be useful to come in here and do something like, only load this if I actually have this talent selected, right? So if I come in here and select Swiftman, this Weakaura that I'm building is only ever going to go into the loaded tab, meaning it can be triggered at any given time or loaded into memory. If the talent is selected. So if I'm on a priest, it's never going to load. Now I could specify, and you can double click this to select, multiple classes. But maybe I don't want to go that specific. Maybe it's an item cooldown, right? Maybe it's like a mana potion. Maybe I could go in here and, okay, I only play these healers, only load when I'm on my healers. I don't want to see what I'm on my warrior, right? So that's one way you could do that. But in this case, it's a talent, so it makes it simple. Also, maybe when I'm in town, I don't want to see this. So let's say in combat only. And maybe not only in combat, I don't want to see this in dungeons. Let's put in encounter. And so just to be clear, what encounter means is a boss fight. It's something that's got an encounter ID. These are all the encounter. If you hover over this, it gives you the encounter IDs. And you can even specify specifically what encounter ID. So if I wanted this to only load for Moru, I could put in 728 and it would only load when I'm on the Moru fight and in combat with Moru. Now, if that's not the case, it's not the case. And if you want to put multiple in here, you just separate it by commas, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. I think you need spaces too, but you have to test that. But anyways, and you can even do zone ID, so it only loads in certain zones. Now this one's tricky because there's a ton of zones. The best thing I found is, so I'm in Stormwind right now, so when I hover over this, it pulls the current zone ID. So I've got 1453 there listed out. So if you ever want to test it, like maybe you want one just for Black Temple, just zone into Black Temple, pop it open, see what it says for the zone ID, and type that in. Just check that and type it in there, right? I've had trouble trying to find these online. Most of these things like spell IDs and stuff, you can literally get out of the headers of like in the URL of like a Wowhead link, it'll literally have it. But so I just wanted to give you that tip. You can also, if you ever just want to hide a Weakaura outright, just check the never tab, and that just nullifies every other option you have in here and just automatically sends it to the dumpster. So if something is just broken or annoying and you don't want to fix it at the moment, just hit never and send it to the graveyard, fix it later, and then uncheck it and it'll come back up, or whatever the parameters are. Also, excuse me, you can also do by class. You can do by, I showed you that already. You can do by group. And if you double click this, it'll actually give you more options than just one. So if you select it once, you have to pick in a group, in array, not in a group. If you click it again, you could select up to all three. So this would basically mean run always. This would be basically only run in a group. And then obviously everything else. This would be solo only, right, etc. By default, it's not going to differentiate. But anyways, okay. So now we've got an icon that shows off the dynamic information of our trigger. A trigger is looking at the cooldown charges and count of Swiftmend. I have it showing only not on cooldown. I think that meets all of the requirements that you wanted for whatever you were looking at. But let's give it just a little bit more jazz, right? So something else you can do is, let's say you want to put some conditionals in there, right? So that's what conditions does. So these are all like kind of if-then statements that you can add additional trigger and actions into. So for example, if I say if trigger one is, let's say, on cooldown, and that statement is true, meaning that if this is on cooldown, then maybe you can make it make a sound, right? Or you could, well, it's going to hide the icon. So this really isn't a good example. Maybe what if I said, what if the remaining duration, or wait, isn't there a way to check the cooldown? If spell count, maybe remaining duration, that might not actually work. Well, let's try remaining duration. If it's less than or equal to 2 seconds, let's say, let's see if I try to make it play a sound. I'm going to make it play bam on the master channel. And that should make a sound, right? I might have the game muted actually, so this might not actually be a good test. But anyways, this is where you could add that kind of stuff. So if you wanted, for example, like, let me show you one I have. So when I put Life Bloom on people, this is a Weakaura that you see on the frame there. So when I get to 3 stacks, it changes the text to green. And when this gets sub 2 seconds, it changes it to the text to red, and then changes it from 1 number to a decimal number. So let me show you what that looks like, just so I can give you an example, because I can't really think of a great one for Swiftmend. I apologize, but I could show you what mine looks like. So regrowth, here's my trigger, right? It's literally just smart group, which I always recommend you use if you're doing anything with raids for like checking of frames or debuffs. I've got player only, mine only, auto clone means that if there's multiple trues of the trigger, right? If I've got a or if I've got multiple life balloons out of multiple people, it'll repeat the trigger over and over and put the icon on multiple things is all that means. Instead of, if you don't check that, then it'll only pick the last true trigger. So I might have a 3 stack here, but I put it on another person. That 3 stack I had is going to get deleted because it's not cloning, and it's going to put a new the latest Weakaura on this other frame instead. So you don't want that if you're doing that. So here's what a condition looks like. So remaining duration, less than 3 seconds, then change the text color to red and change the zoom slightly. If, another one, if the stacks equal 3, then change the text color to green, right? That's all that's doing. Super simple. But for the purposes of what you were looking for, at least on a kind of a primer on how this works, this is all you need. Now you could even, this is all done in one. You could break this up into actual multiple triggers or multiple things, right? Like I could have 2 Weakauras that I combine into a group that do different things all off the same spell. That's a little bit harder to kind of explain. It's not too bad really, but it's just a matter of trying to think of an example if I have one anywhere. I don't think I really do. But like, for example, I could have one that would only show, what I could do is I could duplicate this, right? And I could have another one that's part 2, and I'm going to merge them into a group. So I'm going to control click the other one and then hit add to group. Now they're one group here. That's what this is. And I can add an icon to that group also instead of just the sub triggers, right? So now I've got this. This is made up of these 2. So, and I can change the order. That doesn't really matter unless you do a dynamic group, but regardless. So let's pull this one back up. So this one down here, I'm going to change it from not on cooldown to when it is on cooldown. Let's desaturate it, right? And so here's the other thing. Now I've got two in here, right? So I need to change these back so we can actually see them. Talented, yep. Now we should see it, right? So now when I put this on here, I'm going to Swiftmend and see how it goes gray? That's the second Weakaura. The first one trigger failed, it turned off. The second one now is true. That one's going to show. And then as soon as it comes off cooldown, you're going to see here, it lights back up. Easy peasy. And you could, I mean, I could kind of exaggerate it to make it more, you get the point, hopefully. Anyways, that's kind of a primer on how to do them. That should help you through most of the things you probably want to do. If you want to get more complicated with things on your raid frames, like my HOTS or something like that, or an innervate, whatever, I can do that. I can walk you through that as well. But that's a little bit more complicated. Not too bad, but it just requires a few more steps and a little bit more know-how. There's some finagling sometimes with the frame stratas, and because different add-ons have different stratas and all kinds of weird things can happen there. But hopefully that was everything you need. If you got questions, obviously feel free to just hit me up on Discord. All right. Hope it helped.